In the workshop today, we've got Scott's brand new Ransom Enduro bike. Now, I've been lucky enough to have had this bike for 3 or 4 weeks now, and I've been able to take it to a couple of bike parks in the UK, Bike Park Wales and Revolution, and also ride it on the trails around where I live. So I've been able to come up with a few thoughts as to how it performs. But before I go into that, I want to go into a few of the details that make this new bike pretty special. So normally when a brand launches a new bike, we go away to some far-flung destination and to keep it out of prying eyes. And this time it's been a bit different because Scott gave us the bike about a month ago and we've been riding it under the noses of the public. In fact, I took this bike to Bike Park Wales on a really busy day, and because it looks so similar to the rest of the Scott range, all I needed to do was put a bit of black tape over the name here, and nobody noticed that I was on a completely new bike. So there's a very strong family resemblance to the rest of the Scott range with the new Ransom. So this bike resurrects the Ransom name and replaces the old Genius LT. And it gets 170 millimeters of travel front and rear, which is pretty big travel for an enduro bike. It puts it into some of the longest travel enduro bike categories up against things like the Specialized Enduro, the Pivot, Firebird 2.9 for instance, the Bold Unplugged. Now, like the other bikes in the Scott range, it will accept both wheel sizes. You can run 29-inch wheels and 27.5-inch wheels. As I've got it set up here, it's got the 29-inch wheels. Now there's a little flip chip on the rocker link that lets you raise and lower the BB and adjust the head angle slightly if you're switching between wheels to try and keep the geometry as similar as possible. Now it doesn't quite do that, but I'm going to go into that a little bit later. Now it uses the rocker link design that's on the Genius and the Spark, again with the shock mounted upside down, so that Scott's proprietary Twinloc system can access the damping and the air spring. So all of the cables are neatly enclosed within the down tube and then run up into the bottom of the shock. So what that means is you can change the travel of the Ransom at the flick of a lever effectively. You can go from 170 mil of travel to 120 millimeters of travel at the back. And you also stiffen up the damping, the compression damping in the process. Now what this means is that if you're climbing or if you are riding on kind of lumpy terrain where you need pedal clearance, it effectively raises the dynamic ride height of the bike. Now Scott has kind of worked out this is around about 20 millimeters of bottom bracket height increase when you put it into the traction mode, and it also steepens the head angle and the seat angle as well, so it makes for a better climbing position and also more ground clearance when you're pedaling. Now this is really good feature because on a lot of enduro bikes you try to pedal and you're catching pedals everywhere on really rocky terrain, especially when they've got quite low BB. So I think it's a really good feature on this bike, even if the way that they do it connected to the fork I think is a little bit overcomplicated. So Scott say that this is the stiffest and strongest carbon frame they've ever made, but they also claim that it's one of the lightest enduro frames on the market. In fact, I can believe that because this bike, fully built up, weighs 28.5 pounds without pedals, which compares to, let's say, the Specialized Enduro Pro 2.9, which has a similar specification and comes in at 31.5 pounds. So it's 3 pounds lighter than that equivalent Specialized Enduro. Now that's a big difference. And that's with carbon wheels on both bikes. So this is a really light enduro bike, and I've got to applaud Scott for managing to do that, but that's something that's really in their DNA. A few of the things that I've noticed about this bike, now we've measured this in the workshop, we weighed it obviously as well, and one of the problems with this bike that's particularly when you take into account the Twinloc system that lets you raise that dynamic ride height, is that the BB height on this bike I feel is too high. Now on the Scott Genius, they went super low with the BB height, and if you ran it with the plus wheels, the 27.5 plus wheels in the low setting, you had a really low BB, like 320 something millimeters, which meant that you did clip your pedals everywhere or a lot of places. So, and Scott actually wanted you to put it in the high position with those wheels. Now, it's my theory that on this bike, they went in the other direction and they went way too conservative, and maybe as a result of that Genius BB height. So on this bike with these wheels, with the 29-inch wheels, in the low setting, the BB is 354 millimeters, which is really high. And when you look at probably an average BB height for a 29-inch wheel enduro bike is around about the 330 to 340 mark. That's like almost 15 millimeters higher. And particularly when you can raise the bike for climbing to give you more, and lumpy trails to give you more BB clearance, I think it's a bit of a mistake. But some of the reason for that can be attributed to the wheel size and the difference between a 29-inch wheel and a 27.5-inch wheel with big volume tyres. Now we've measured the 27 by 5 2.8 and a 29 by 2.6. And the radius difference is around about 17 millimeters. So that's a big difference. And when you think that the geometry chip there will only make I think it's a 6 millimeter difference in BB height, that's never going to account for the difference. So you're always going to compromise in one of the positions. So for me, on this bike, it's probably better run with 27.5 wheels and say 2.6-inch tyres, just to bring that chassis down and give you a more stable riding position and be able to load those corners and stuff. I think it will feel much better. So one of the things that I did to alleviate this problem a little bit was ran a lot more sag than I probably would otherwise. So and that just meant that I could settle into the travel more and run a lower dynamic BB. So I actually went to about, I think it was 32 or 33% sag at the rear and around about just under 30% at the front. So more than I would normally run. What I also did was there's a really neat feature on this new bike, which is also going to be available on some of the Genius models as well. And that is the ramp adjust feature. And with just a flick of a switch, you can change the progression of the spring curve. And you do that when you flick the switch, it opens or closes a third chamber in the shock. So it really changes the feel of the suspension. And so you can have a bike that's really rampy, and you can really load up on smooth bike park trails where you want to get that pop, and you want to, for jumps and for berms, and you just need that support. Or you can open it up and you have a much more linear feel that is really good on long, rough descents, natural terrain. So, and that's such an easy thing to do, but you have two completely different bikes when you do it. And I think it's an absolutely brilliant feature. A couple of other numbers on this bike. It's a 64.5 head angle, which is pretty much bang on what Scott says. It's actually only a degree slacker than the Genius, believe it or not. So that just shows how progressive the geometry of the Genius is. If we look at the rest of the geometry, it's 438 chainstay. The wheelbase is around 1245 we measured here, which is very similar to what they claim as well. The reach depends on whether you have it in the steep or the slack setting, which is the low or the high setting. In the low setting we've got here, it's on a large, is about 466 mil, which is not the biggest, but it's pretty ample, to be honest. I didn't feel particularly cramped on it, but it's not the most progressive. However, there is an XL that you can go up to if you think that's a little bit too short. So moving on to the seat angle, Scott claims a effective seat angle of 75.5 degrees, but being an effective angle doesn't take into account that actually the genuine layback of the seat tube is 67.9 degrees that we measured. So as you extend that saddle up, it's going to go further back over the rear wheel and the rear axle. So if you're pretty tall and you run a really high saddle height, you are going to be further back over the rear wheel, and that won't be an optimum climbing position. So we would prefer to see a slightly steeper actual seat angle on the Ransom. So a few of the things that I don't like about the Scott, aside from the BB height, first of all, connected to that, the crank's 175 millimeters, which does give you a little bit more leverage, but this is an enduro bike, and I think Scott could sacrifice a little bit of that to give you some more ground clearance, and that would also allow them to drop the BB a little bit as well. So 170s, 165 maybe, but 170 would be a good start. Moving towards the cockpit, this top of the range model has got the Syncross Hickson one-piece carbon fibre bar and stem. Now it's a pretty futuristic component, not my cup of tea in terms of looks, and also for me it doesn't put my hands in particularly the position that I want. I think there's a little bit too much back sweep on it, and because it's a one-piece bar and stem, you can't rotate the bars to get a more comfortable position. It also doesn't really save any weight, or hardly any weight. Fortunately, it only comes on this top model. All the other bikes further down the range come with separate stems and bars, so you can actually play around with your handlebar position and your hand position. The Scott Twinloc has been refined again for this year, so it does work a lot better, but fundamentally it's still underneath the handlebar where I would rather have my dropper post remote, because I use my dropper post remote way more than I would use the Twinloc. The other problem is with the dropper post is the routing here is around the clamp for the grip, and I've just had non-stop problems with the remote and the dropper post not releasing. Now when I got the bike, Scott replaced the cable at the launch, and that was okay briefly for a little bit, and then it just got worse and worse, and now I have to actually pull the cable out here to tension it before I can release the post. It's a real pain in the arse, and I've spoken to other journos who've got these bikes and they've also encountered similar problems. So I don't know whether it's something to do with the design of the clamp, the grip, or something with the internal routing that's causing the issue, but either way, it's a real pain. The new Ransom range consists of 4 different models. At the top there are 2 full HMX carbon bikes, and then lower down the price points there are 2 full alloy bikes. 2 of those models come with either 29 or 27.5 inch wheels, and 2 of them only come with 29 inch wheels. We don't have pricing yet, but obviously it'll be released now, so you can go and look at the Scott website in your country to check out how much they cost. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into the new Scott Ransom. I've enjoyed riding it. Hopefully we're going to get it on test later in the year up against some of its peers, such as the Specialized Enduro. So let us know what you think of the new bike in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks very much for watching.